Thanks, Tony. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the Spiny Dogfish Management Board meeting to order. My name is Chris Bat-Savage. I'm the administrative proxy from North Carolina, and I'll be serving as chair this morning. I'll start off by approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any modifications to the agenda that was presented in the briefing materials?
I have no hands raised.
Okay, then we will consider the agenda approved. Next is approval of the proceedings from the October 2020 board meeting. Do any board members have any modifications to the minutes from that meeting?
I have no hands raised.
Okay, then we will also consider those approved. Next up is public comment. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on any issues related to spiny dogfish that are not on the agenda today. Tony, are there any hands up from the public to provide comment?
Just give me a second. I do not have any hands raised.
Okay, moving right along. Next item is a review of an analysis on spiny dogfish trip limit and market price. And today we have Jason Didden from the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council to present some information on that. Good morning, Jason, and please begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I'll just wait for my screen share is gray right now. There we go. Okay, do you have a full PowerPoint slide up right now?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. So this is Jason Didden, Mid-Atlantic Council staff for Spiny Dogfish. As a bit of a lead up for some of the trip limit analysis, going to roll through a little bit of background because it helps set the scene for why the council is looking at this. Here we go. Okay, so we're currently at an acceptable biological catch just shy of 39 million pounds. After discards mostly are accounted for, a little bit of wreck in Canadian catch, just under 30 million pound quota. And so that's the current fishing year, starts May 1, 2021, and also planned for 2022. The council had set multi-year specs. For 2021, that ABC was associated with basically a 1/3 chance of overfishing. It's a little more conservative, precautionary than the maximum risk of overfishing allowed by the council because the stock size, as estimated, was a bit below the target. So with the council's risk policy, if the stock size slips below the target, the council tolerates less and less chance of overfishing. So that was the estimated risk of overfishing for 2021, and then the SSC and council extended that through the 2022 fishing year since we have a research track assessment underway and we're not getting another assessment for 2022 in particular. In terms of just broad management, it's open access, requires a federal permit at the federal level, and the current federal trip limit is 6,000 pounds. So we didn't get like an assessment update. The Science Center did provide us with an update on the survey. No survey in 2020, but you can see that 2021 data point more or less in between the 18 and 19 data points. And same thing with the PUP index that comes out of the same survey, spring, trawl, Science Center survey. PUP index about also in between the two previous data points. Landing since management. So landings kind of increased and tracked up with the increase in the quota after as the stock was rebuilt initially, but then really since 2010 it's kind of lagged the quota. And we had the stock assessment update that's caused the lowering of the quota for the 2019 fishing year. And then the projections coming out of that had the stock floating back up, and those last two data points in orange are the 2021-2022 quotas. So landings For the 2020 fishing year, we're down a good bit from 2019. This is current fishing year. So the current fishing year has been lagging even 2020 fishing year, which again, that was down itself. Dogfish prices, inflation adjusted to 2020 dollars. If there's a trend, it depends on exactly where you start. Last several years has been a general uptrend, but one of the tasks that I'm kind of engaged in for the research track assessment that's ongoing has been just doing some data cleaning. We've had some issues with kind of misreported landings, like whole dogfish or gutted dogfish reported as fins, and then that gets expanded. So I saw a couple things that kind of caught my attention in some of the last couple of years, which may affect that price information a bit. Hopefully not a ton, but am engaged doing some data kind of sifting and cleaning as part of some of my kind of activities with the research track assessment. So our advisory panel creates our fishery performance report, FPR, each year. Pretty much similar sentiments as previous years, flagging that markets and trip limits really serve to restrict landings in this fishery. They've noted the continued erosion of participants. When you look at numbers of participants landing different amounts of fish each year, you can see that we've had a number of years of decline. We got input from some of the AP members that an increase in the trip limit to 10,000 pounds would help increase landings. Folks flag that if we go back quickly, you can see that orange line, the end of the last fishing year, kind of flatlined. It's normally when Virginia would be fishing. So we got some input that in the end of the last fishing year, Virginia had some diversion of participants to shrimp fishery, some oystering. And then we also got input from not an AP member, but member of the public in Massachusetts that for this year, the blue line, Massachusetts landings were lagging a bit. Again, some people are shifting into other fisheries. It seemed like there were some availability issues, with warm water, not finding dogfish in the normal spots, and some processors who wanted skates brought in along with the dogfish. And if they couldn't provide the skates, then the processors weren't interested in their dogfish. So we kind of got a number of reasons for both the Virginia tail off in the 2020 fishing year and the slow start in Massachusetts with the 2021 fishing year. The advisory panel continues to flag some science concerns, chief among them the Bigelow operations performance issues. The assessment to date has really been heavily dependent on that spring survey, and whether it's missed stations, low sampled strata, shifts in timing. There's a lot of concern that influences our ability to get a sense of where the dogfish population is headed. Also, we've had recent research that looks at dogfish distribution beyond the survey area, also vertical distribution, and that kind of adds some uncertainty about what the trawl survey really means in terms of dogfish. And then kind of continuing to flag that some kind of recent research on fecundity and in terms of how they're pupping just kind of raises concern among the AP of our ability to kind of know what's going on with dogfish. So the SSC takes all that and they kind of just basically endorse staying our status quo specifications. They noted that data gap with the 2020 spring survey certainly increases uncertainty. But the way those indices and the biomass data points we looked at earlier are calculated, some of the 2021 missed stations would cause that data point to be an underestimate because of how the expansion works. And so no changes from the SSC. So on the triplet analysis itself, given that erosion of participation and requests by at least some parts of the AP over time, to look at the trip limit issue. The council had kind of flagged this as a task related to an executive order to try to take a bit of a deeper dive in consultation with some staff at the Science Center. They said, well, one way to look at this is just look at how prices moved during the last trip limit adjustments. And so we looked at both the 2014 and 2016 trip limit changes, and there really didn't seem to be a whole lot of impact on prices, at least at the coast-wide level. We have gotten some input at some meetings over the last couple of months that there may have been some kind of more regional, local reactions in terms of prices with some of the trip limit changes, but at least looking coast-wide, didn't see any drastic changes. At the committee level, National Marine Fisheries Service flagged that it'd be useful, at least for decision-making, and certainly for NEPA analysis, to have a bit of additional descriptive information on some recent trips. And so between the committee meeting and the council meeting, did a couple analyses just to help folks get a sense of how the fishery is operating. So these are the 2019 and 2020 fishing years. And so there's 8,215 dots on this figure. Now a lot of them are together, so you just kind of get a blur. But you can see, that 6,000 pound trip limit really, there aren't a lot of trips above that. And you can see how dark it gets near that line. There are a lot of trips at or very close to that 6,000 pound trip limit. And these kind of dots, I just sorted them by date. So the start of the 2019 fishing year on the left, and just moving through these two fishing years through time from left to right. Again, just to get a sense of how much of an impact and what a trips look like. So again, there's over 8,000 dots on this map. So try to get a little more sense of the types of trips and how and what percent of landings those same 8,200 plus dots are now distorted from largest trip to smallest trip. So like some of those the higher dots here, the highest ones, they're over on the left here. So trying to get a sense of these size trips, how much of total landings are represented by these different trip types. So there's relatively few trips that are above 6,000 pounds. Some of the states have higher trip limits, and vessels without a federal dogfish permit can fish in state waters, and it's an open access permit, so to some degree it can be picked up and dropped. So the larger trips are 4% of landings. Then trips between 5,800 pounds and 6,000 pounds. These all these dots in here, I think there's probably about 3,000, or no, not quite that many, but there's a couple thousand dots in there. So close to the trip limit is over a third of landings. That's between 5,800 pounds and 6,000 pounds, real close to trip limit. That's over a third of landings. Between 5,000 pounds and 5,800 pounds, that's another 25% of landings. So again, just a sense of you have a large chunk of the landings fairly close to the trip limit. And again, exact same data, same 8,000 trips, just kind of binning them. And you can see not so many trips on the right here, above 6,000 pounds, that's 4% of landings. Between 5,000 and 6,000 pounds, that's really the plurality of trips, the single biggest bin here. You've got over 3,000 trips between 5,000 and 6,000 pounds, and they make over about 2/3 of the landings in that group. So again, just a sense of what types of trips are responsible for landings, and I think it does provide a sense that trip limit is restricting, and you would expect some usage of an increased trip limit. For the monitoring committee, We have 2 ex officio industry members on the monitoring committee. They recommended a doubling of the trip limit to 12,000 pounds to try to kind of get back to that somewhat higher participation level that we've seen in relatively recent history. The rest of the monitoring committee has always kind of been more focused on, as long as we're adhering to the overall quota, the trip limits shouldn't be having a huge impact on stock size. But the size of the change, if the council wants to make a change, kind of dictates the process and the impacts associated with those, whether it's through specifications or a framework or an amendment, and what kind of NEPA analysis is necessary. But there was some input from the ex officio industry members. They requested that 12,000 pound change be made rapidly through an emergency rule, and kind of given the requirements for emergency rules, that seemed like a not super feasible path. So at the council level, the council didn't change, didn't recommend any changes, specifications or quotas, but did recommend 25% increase the federal trip limit, bringing up to 7,500 pounds. It's generally in line with the percentage changes for some of those other recent ones, and could be done through specifications. The target date of May 1 is kind of the target date when things occur through specifications. Then the council also voted to consider, when it meets again in December, whether or not to prioritize a framework for 2022 for additional modifications of the trip limit. And some of that discussion was also kind of noting that how the council proceeds or certainly takes action with a framework like that would likely depend on the results of the pending research track assessment. And then the New England Council will take up Dogfish in December, jointly managed with New England. If the councils don't disagree, NIMS has, if the councils don't agree, NIMS has considerable flexibility to resolve that difference. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation, Jason. Does anyone have any questions on the presentation?
We have a hand from David Borden.
Hey, go ahead, David.
I couldn't get unmuted. I don't know whether it was my end or Tony's end. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, if industry members want to craft and submit alternatives for a different arrangement on trip limits, when would they have to submit it for the framework?
Jason?
The general goal for frameworks is that the council comes out of the first framework meeting with the range of alternatives. So, I mean, it sounded like most likely the council might pick something up and have a first framework meeting after at least a good sense of the results of the research track are known. And that's probably going to be, I think that's over the summer. So it would just be really that first framework meeting, and folks can talk to their council members, certainly make comments at that meeting. But that first, and we have on the council's website, we have like the dates for public comments leading up to each council meeting. So folks could submit comments leading up to that first council meeting when framework meeting 1 is on the agenda.
So, if I might, Mr. Chairman, that's December 22, or are we talking 21?
I anticipate currently, if the council proceeds, if the council prioritizes such a framework, that it would take it up in late summer or fall of 2022 for framework 1.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thanks, David. Any other questions?
We have no other hands.
Okay, thanks. All right, So we'll move on to the next item, which is to review and possibly revise the 22-23 specifications. And this is kind of based on the information that Jason just provided as far as the trip analysis and what the Mid-Atlantic Council chose when they met a couple weeks ago. So Kirby has a presentation, I think, to go over, or at least information to go over this with us. So Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a brief presentation. I'll just wait for Maya to get up on the screen. All right, next slide. As Jason noted, the Mid-Atlantic Council recommended increase in the federal trip limit up to 7,500 pounds for the 2022 fishing season. They also, as he mentioned, are considering adding a framework adjustment to consider changes to the trip limit in their implementation plan, as they'll take up in December. For the board's consideration today, the board can modify the northern region trip limit, and that's for the states of Maine through Connecticut for the 2022 fishing season. Previously, the board had set that trip limit at 6,000 pounds. And that's what the trip limit is currently for the region in this fishing season 2021. Next slide. So in terms of board actions for consideration today, the board could, as noted, increase the northern region trip limit to be consistent with the council's recommendation to NOAA. And the other consideration is whether, if to pursue that, recommend other states south of the northern region, so New York through North Carolina, to implement trip limits that don't limit potential 7,500 pound federal trip limit. So next slide, that concludes my presentation. And I think the only other thing I would note is that if the board wants to make changes to that northern region trip limit, given that they previously approved that, it would likely be a final action. We would either need a roll call vote or agreement on the motion.
All right, thanks, Kirby. Any questions for Kirby?
I don't have any hands, Chris.
Okay, thanks. Kirby kind of laid out the options and considerations for the board today. Based on what the Mid-Atlantic Council did as far as trip limits a couple weeks ago, but also keeping in mind that this is a jointly managed plan in federal waters for the Mid-Atlantic Council and New England Council, and New England will be meeting in December to set specifications, and then from there, NOAA Fisheries would then set the specifications based on input from both councils in federal waters in May. So for next May. So just looking for some input direction from the board as far as what they want to do in state waters, particularly for the New England states that currently are under a 6,000 pound trip limit.
I have Ray Kane.
Okay, Ray.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you hear me?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, I'd like to put a motion forward. And if you'd like me to read it, I'll read it.
Yes, please.
Yes, move to set a 7,500 pound trip limit in the northern region, Maine through Connecticut, for fishing year 2022, contingent upon NOAA Fisheries adopting a 7,500 pound trip limit for federal waters. If a 7,500 pound trip limit is not approved in federal waters, then the 6,000 pound trip limit will remain in the northern region. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Ray. Do we have a second?
Sheree Patterson.
It is seconded by Sheree Patterson. Any discussion on the motion?
I have Pat Gear.
Okay, Pat.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify, the states of New York through North Carolina are still allowed to increase their trip limit to 7,500 pounds?
Yes, they can. Since the states can set their own trip limits, they do have the option of also increasing to 7,500 pounds, and I think it would also, based, contingent upon what NOAA fisheries adopts.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any further questions?
This is Jason. I can't figure out the hand raise feature, but can I ask a question?
Oh yes, definitely.
So if by some chance NOAA was able to implement a trip limit change a little bit early, would this motion not allow those states to follow suit?
Early meaning before the 2022 season?
Yeah, I mean, we're going through the specifications process. The target is May 1. If it happened to get done like 2 weeks early, and was effective 2 weeks early, would these states, not be able to follow suit if it happened to be effective a little bit early?
I think, based on the motion, maybe not. I'll look to Tony on that, and it also may depend on states' ability to go through their administrative processes to change trip limits in state waters, whether they'd be able to do that before May 1st. But I'll just see if Tony has any thoughts on that, and maybe if any of the northern states have thoughts as far as what they could do if this was an option to set a trip limit, and make the trip limit change before May 1st.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the motion reads, it's for fishing year 2022. We could revise the motion to change it, but as you said, I don't know the ability for all of the states to make a change fast enough that would make a difference for if it was only 2 weeks early. But I guess it would depend on what NOAA was thinking. But while I'm speaking, I just want to let you know that I have Eric Reed, Mike Luisi, and Ray Kane.
All right, thanks. Eric?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, if for some unknown reason New England were to approve a trip limit of, let's say, 8,000 or 9,000 pounds, this motion should probably read adopt the trip limit of at least 7,500 pounds, just in case, because if it's strictly 7,500 pounds and it goes to 7,600 pounds, the motion would not make the 6,000 pounds go away.
Thanks for bringing that up, Eric. I had kind of similar questions about that. If New England picked a trip limit that was different than 7,500, and then Garfo ultimately selected trip limit, kind of split in the difference, whether it was higher or lower, how this would work. I guess with that, if Cynthia could possibly provide some insight on that scenario Eric just gave, to see if this motion might need some modifying. So Cynthia, if you don't mind.
Sure, yeah. So I think that might be a good modification because, yeah, in the eventuality, because we know that New England Council hasn't met yet, in the possibility that they do propose a different limit, a potential federal trip limit, it comes back to the agency as having the option to select any alternative that has not been rejected by either council. So essentially that would give us the option to go with either. So the potential does sit there, that we could go with a different one. And we have been kind of talking internally about whether the fact that, like that the mid didn't select a different number, does that count as an outright rejection, or if, how that works. But essentially where we are right now, we're thinking that say, so the mid proposed 7,500. If New England said like 9,000 for some reason, we would have the option to pick either. So if that eventuality happened, I think it would probably be good to have some language that that kind of better reflects essentially similar to what you have right now with contingent on NOAA Fisheries adoption of a higher trip limit, maybe a little bit more flexible just in case something different comes out of New England.
So yeah, thanks, Cindy. I appreciate that explanation. Eric, I think you had, I guess, a suggested modification to the motion. If you want to provide that now, and then we can see if Ray and Cherie are okay with maybe doing a friendly amendment.
Well, Mr. Chairman, you just have to put in either no less than or at least 7,500 pounds, however the maker and the seconder want to handle it. But that's a pretty simple adjustment.
Okay, yeah, we could try adopting at least a 7,500 pound trip limit for federal waters. I don't know if we're gonna need to make a modification in the next sentence or not, or just there. Is that, Eric, is that kind of, let's get into what you're suggesting, and I think is also in line with what the information Cynthia just gave us, right?
Well, it's got to be in both sentences, Mr. Chairman. That would be my opinion.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, Ray and Cherie, are you okay with this modification to the motion?
Yes, Chris, I'm good with it.
Yes, I'm fine. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you.
Chris, should it say at least a 7,500 pound trip limit for this first sentence as well? That first 7,500 pound?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. So
And then
yes.
Follow-up question in terms of process. So then if NOAA does adopt a different trip limit, then would it be the intention of the board for staff to come back and provide that trip limit and do an email vote to set a final trip limit if it is something higher than 7,500 pounds?
I think that would make the most sense. Because it's really hard to predict exactly what will ultimately happen. I mean, yeah, I think from staff's perspective, Tony, is that probably the easiest way to handle that, or would this really be up to the board to decide how to proceed under that scenario?
I think that would be the easiest. Bob has his hand up, so he might have a different idea of direction. So I'm going to let him speak.
Okay, yeah, Bob, yeah, appreciate any input.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just a thought. I think really what the states are trying to do here, and the northern states in particular, is just mirror the federal trip limit. With the numbers in here, it kind of pins us in. Maybe it's just simply a move to establish a northern region trip limit consistent with what NOAA establishes for FY22, and keep it at that, because we don't, who knows? Maybe NOAA decides on 7,000 pounds, or NOAA decides on 9,000 pounds after they get New England input. And I think all these multiple votes may be tricky. So I think it's just establish a northern region trip limit consistent with what NOAA establishes for FY22. If NOAA maintains a 6,000 pound trip limit, the northern region will maintain the 6,000 pound trip limit as well. Something along those lines to just say, we're going to ride along with what NOAA does, and if NOAA doesn't change, we're not going to change either. But we can work on the wording if you want.
That makes a lot of sense, because again, it saves from a process standpoint, and kind of allows for a lot of flexibility. Well, I guess we could try modifying the motion that way. It changes it pretty substantively. I think we're trying to get to the same place either way. I guess would it be okay to just modify to that level? Just kind of trying to follow parliamentary procedures as best as I can. I guess look for some guidance from staff on that, and then also see if Ray and Cherie are okay with what Bob is suggesting.
Chris, this is Bob again, if I might. I think you're right. It is a pretty significant change to this motion, and there are a lot of details in this motion that would be modified. So, there's two ways out of this. One is a substitute motion, or the other is just to have the board agree to, withdraw this motion because it is property of the board now, and then start all over. The third option is, Robert's Rules of Order really being stretched, which is modifying this one with the approval of Ray and Cherie. It's up to the group, but any of those are viable. I mean, the idea is just to make sure we get the will of the board captured in the motion.
Good, thanks. I guess we'll try this. Hopefully this might be quick. Is there any objection by the board to withdraw this motion and then start with a new motion as Bob suggested?
I have some hands up by Eric, Mike Luisi, and David Borden, and I don't know, some of them have been up, so I don't know if that's what they're objecting to or not. One went down. Eric and David, are you objecting?
Well, I just, if I might, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, my suggested language of at least is in case New England should set a higher trip limit. If it is the will of the board to set a trip limit at 7,500 pounds, that's what they should say. If you set a trip limit of at least 7,500 pounds, it's pretty ambiguous. So, I mean, to me, I think that move to set a trip limit at 7,500 pounds is what the board seems like it wants, and just let it go.
Okay. Anyone else with thoughts on how to proceed with this motion or possibly an alternative motion?
I have Matt Gates.
Hey, Matt.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this. I think what I was thinking of doing is making a substitute motion to do what Bob indicated, if that's helpful to you, to move this along, in case that was the will of what the board wanted, was to do the set the limit the same as what the feds will eventually approve, or if the will is to stick with the 7,500 pounds regardless, then I won't bother.
I think at this point it'd be appropriate to put up a substitute motion that we can kind of debate both at one time. So Matt, yeah, if you're ready to offer one, that'd be great.
Okay, I'll try. I'm doing it on the fly, so bear with me a little bit. So I would move to set the northern region, Maine through Connecticut, trip limit for FY 2022 equal to the limit approved by NOAA Fisheries.
Matt, is that reading the way you'd like to see it? I guess we're still crafting it here a bit. I'll let Maya finish that before letting you determine if this is what you'd like.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Sorry, Megan Ware.
Okay, seconded by Megan Ware. And I guess for efficiency's sake, go ahead and take comments on this motion, the substitute motion, and the main or the first motion too, just to move things along. So, Tony, I know we had some other folks in the queue. I guess who do we have? I guess in order right now to make sure I don't miss anybody.
Mike Luisi, David Borden, and Adam Nowalski. I think that's everybody that was in the queue.
Okay, Mike Luisi.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I don't really have a dog in the fight here with the northern region, but I understand where they're coming from. I think the motion to substitute would read a little more clearly if it would state that the Northern Region state waters trip limit for FY22 equal to the federal waters trip limit approved by NOAA Fisheries. I think it just clarifies what the states are doing as compared with what NOAA Fisheries would approve in federal waters. It just may be more clear there. And I also do have one other comment. If you want to take that one first, I have another comment based on what Pat Gear said earlier.
All right, thanks. Yeah, so Matt and Megan, are you okay with that suggested modification by Mike?
Yeah, I appreciate that refinement to it. Thank you.
Yep, fine here.
Great. Yeah, Mike, please continue with your comments.
Yeah, I had my other comment is related to what Pat Gear brought up about the states of New York through North Carolina. I just want to make sure that we're still in the position where those states can set trip limits exceeding those of federal waters, and the fishermen who have federal permits would need to relinquish their permit in federal waters in order to fish in state waters at a higher trip limit. And the reason I ask is that we currently in Maryland have a 10,000 pound trip limit in state waters. And I just want to make sure that that's still a viable path forward, and that nothing's changed over the last couple years to limit state waters to that of federal waters.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'm not aware of any changes. So in this motion, or in the specifications in federal waters shouldn't impact that at all. If Kirby, if I'm wrong, please let me know. But yeah, again, I think what's set in state waters from New York to North Carolina still stands.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
All right, thanks. Next up is David Borden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This will be quick. I support the substitute. I think it's simpler. I think it accomplishes what Ray and Cherie originally wanted to accomplish, and it avoids some of the difficulty that we might encounter depending upon what NOAA does in federal waters. So I support the substitute.
Okay, thanks, David. Next up is Adam Nowalski.
Where does this leave a possible disconnect between what we said at this board, what New England does, and where the Mid-Atlantic was? And I guess at the end of the day, it's all going to come down to what NOAA approves regardless. But are we in a position here that we potentially set ourselves up for a disconnect where some other group has to reconsider something as well?
That's a good question, Adam. I guess I'll go to Kirby to see if there's any disconnect with what we're doing today compared to the specifications that'll be set in federal waters. So Kirby, if you have any thoughts on that?
Sorry, I was trying to help Maya with wordsmithing this a little bit to be more clear. Adam, can you repeat the question one more time?
I was just trying to get clarity on where this would potentially put us for a disconnect. So what we had at the recent council meeting was a firm 7,500 number that was not an up to, it was not an at least, it was a firm number that came out of the council. We don't know what New England is going to do yet. We don't know what the service is going to do yet. The original motion we had here today started with that matching firm 7,500 number. We've got the main motion now set to at least a number, and now we've got a potential substitute that says we're just going to match whatever NOAA Fisheries does. So the specific question is where does this leave us with the potential disconnect between management bodies, and would there need to be further action for that to get addressed by one of those management bodies moving forward?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So, my read of the substitute motion is it actually helps cover what, this range of potentially different trip limits that New England might offer, the New England Council might offer, and what the service ultimately implements. and allows for this board not to have to come back and revisit what the trip limit is that's approved by the service, for example, at the winter meeting or having to do so just before the start of the 2022 fishing season. So to me, the substitute motion aligns well with that, if that's the will of the board. But if there, I guess to maybe your concern, if there is interest in having a set 75,000 or 7,500 pound trip limit for just the northern region, then that's what you guys should discuss. And I'll just note that I know Jason Denton is trying to, he'd like to raise his hand, but we have him listed as a organizer right now, so he's not able to do so. But Mr. Chair, if you want to call on him at one point, that might be helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Kirby. Yeah, Jason, do you have anything to add on this point?
And I was just going to add, it seems like this would allow the flexibility to resolve any disconnect that occurs between the two councils.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Okay, any other hands up from board members?
I have Cynthia, David. Well, David Borden was first, then Cynthia and Nicola.
Okay, we'll go with Cynthia first. So Cynthia.
Yeah, this is just quick clarification, just in case it wasn't clear, but maybe to just assuage any potential apprehension or fear that folks might have. But the service is not, like, say there is disconnect in what the Mid-Atlantic or New England do set for their recommendations. The service would not set like a third option or deviate from what has been recommended from either council. We would just select from the alternative options that are set before us. So it's not like there would be like a third thing that comes out and then we kind of make a different decision like between them or something. So say it was like 7,500 and 9,000, we wouldn't pick 8,000. We would pick from one of the two options. So it does kind of limit the potential other options that come out. It's really just the uncertainty we have here is that New England hasn't met yet. We don't know what New England's recommendations are. So that's really why we're not considering just the 7,500 right now, because there is the potential that New England would do something else. But the service itself isn't going to propose something completely different. We're going to pick from what comes out of the councils.
Thanks, Cynthia. That's very helpful to know how just kind of the decision process by Garfo on this. David, I'll come to you in a second, but first I'll go to Nicola.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a little bit of apprehension about the open-endedness of the substitute motion. I think the Mid-Atlantic Council selected 7,500, in a balance between desires for a much larger trip limit to fulfill the quota and other concerns about decreased quality and the effect on price and small boat competition that would come along with a much larger trip limit. And not knowing what the New England Council might prefer, it just gives me a bit of pause where this could go, knowing that the New England Council has in the past recommended a complete removal of the federal trip limit. So I think I'm a bit more comfortable with the initial motion that would have mirrored the 7,500 pound trip limit recommended by the council. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. David?
I'll pass, Mr. Chairman. The point's already been made.
Okay, thanks. Tony, any other hands up?
One last hand, two last hands, Joe Semino and then Shanna Madsen.
Okay, thanks. Joe?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just really appreciate Nicola's comments. A lot of folks from New Jersey were amongst those making those comments, and I really do think that the Mid-Atlantic got to a very well-reasoned compromise at 7,500. That's why I still support the original motion.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Shanna?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Apologies if I missed this in the beginning of the presentation, but I guess I'm sort of confused procedurally why we wouldn't hold this meeting after the New England Council gets a chance to meet, like why we wouldn't have this in February and then we'd have a clearer idea of what the path forward would be. And I also wanted to say I did appreciate Nicola's comments as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Shanna. I know October is typically the time of the year that ASMFC sets specifications for spiny dogfish in state waters. Yeah, I guess it's always a timing and order issue where you have really three different management bodies, setting specifications. I'll look to Kirby if he has anything in addition to add to why now as opposed to January or February. So I'll just see if Kirby has any additional thoughts.
I think you captured it pretty well, Mr. Chair. That's just how we've handled specifications in past years. But if there is concern or apprehension about moving forward with this at this point, this board could delay taking action on this motion until after the New England Council meets. So that is another option if that's what the board's desire is.
Yeah, thanks, Kirby. Yeah, that's true. We could always just defer this to the winner if that's the will of the board. Tony, are there any other hands up before we call the question?
We just have Ray Kane, and I just want to make sure if we do defer, we need to make sure that all the states would have time to implement a trip limit that late in the year.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, that's a good point. The later we wait, the less time it is for states to go through their administrative processes. Ray.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I cannot support the substitute motion. In Jason's presentation earlier today, being part of the commission, we've gone up incrementally in 1,000-pound trip limits. And now I'm hearing talk about a 3,000-pound trip limit. We've been able to keep the price paid to harvesters in check by going up in small incremental, increases. And I like what Joe Cimino had to say. I was waiting for Jersey to come in because I know they've got a number of they have a small boat fleet down there also. And I don't want to leave this open-ended. So I would rather, if we could, address this in February after we get a decision from the New England Council. Personally, I went with the 7,500-pound trip limit that came out of the mid. They deciphered, they looked at this, and now it's coming before New England December. So can we not address this at the February meeting? That's my question. But I cannot support the substitute motion because it's an open-ended. And as I said, we have kept the price in check by going up in small increments. The increases have been incremental, 1,000-pound trip limit increases. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. I guess, in terms of addressing this at the winter meeting, I think we'd need a motion to postpone until then, or where we take action now and then see what happens, with New England and then ultimately with Garfa. So, I mean, if there's an interest to postpone this until the winter, I think now would be the time. If not, I think I'll just do one last check for comments, and then I'll allow time to caucus before we call the question.
Megan Ware had her hand up, and then Nicola Meserve, and then Adam Nowalski.
Okay, Megan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to move to postpone this discussion until the ASMFC winter meeting. I think we need a bit more information, and right now, if either of these motions passed as a state, I wouldn't actually know what trip limit to be putting through our regulatory process until we know what NOAA is going to implement. So I don't think this should impact the state's regulatory processes. Thanks.
Okay. We'll let Maya get that up on the board. Motion to postpone, and let her get that up there, and then Megan, you see if that that captures what you'd like.
Can you just repeat the rest of the motion, please?
Yeah, no worries, Maya. Move to postpone because it's this discussion around the state waters trip limit for fishing year 2022 until the ASMFC winter meeting.
Matt Gates, are you seconding?
I just had a point of order on this. That's okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's kind of looking it up, and this is generally a motion to postpone is applied to a main motion. So I'm not sure how you would handle that in this case. I'm not really against putting it off too much, but I'm just not sure if this postponing is the appropriate way to do it.
Thanks. I'll look to staff as far as the appropriateness of a motion to postpone at this point.
I'm not aware of a rule that you're not allowed to postpone or table. I can't remember if table is the more appropriate word, but it's okay. I'm not aware of it being a problem for a substitute motion.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Next up is I had on my list is Nicola.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would prefer that we act on this today, actually. I think that it sends a better signal to the New England Council, our position on this, rather than just reacting to what they determine for the federal limit. And, I'd rather, reconsider our decision if need be. But pick our stance on it now. And I also did have a question about kind of timeline based on some prior discussions with National Marine Fisheries Service staff. I was under the impression that a trip limit, much greater than 7,500 may delay the process due to NEPA requirements and analysis. So I think that was also a consideration in the Mid-Atlantic Council selection of 7,500 pounds in order to do this by FY 2022 or potentially a little bit sooner. Something much larger than that would delay it. So I think there's a lot of rationale again for 7,500 pounds. And I think we're in a good position today to make, to approve that motion to set that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nicola. Yeah, it was stated during the council meeting and the Dogfish Committee meeting by the council that the higher trip limits would take more time just through the the process of that NOAA Fisheries has to go through. So next up I have is Adam Nowalski.
Chris, before you go to Adam, is it possible to get a second to this motion?
Oh yeah, it'd be good to get a second, wouldn't it? Thought it kind of slipped my mind. Sorry about that. Yeah, is there a second on this motion? Because we're debating something that hasn't been seconded yet.
Dennis, do you have your hand up as a second?
I have a procedural question about that motion that you're looking for a second. My question would be, the motion says to postpone this discussion. So it doesn't say anything about postponing the motions. If you're going to postpone the discussion, that means everybody's done talking and we go on to something else. I go along with the previous speaker that says we should vote up and down on the substitute motion and have a main motion. And at that point, someone can make a motion to table or postpone or whatever, but you've got three motions, and generally speaking, we were taught many times that you're only supposed to have two motions up on the table. So first, that third motion isn't correct, and I think that you should handle this, a little closer to normal parliamentary procedure, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I guess, well, yeah, should just see if there's a second to this motion before proceeding any further. So is there a second?
I have no hands in a second. So
Okay.
sorry, David
So-
Borden, are you putting your hand up as a second?
Yes. And if I could comment, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll second it. I think Dennis is making a correct point here that it should be a motion to postpone action, not a discussion.
Yeah, it's a good point. Megan, are you okay with that change?
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion.
Now you have Adam Nowalski.
Adam?
Thank you very much. So I think I'm leaning towards Nicola's most recent comments with regards to preferring to pick a number today that sends a message, and my support would be behind the fixed 7,500 pound number. However, if this motion to postpone were to go forward, would there be any merits for consideration to changing this to just say after the NEFMC meeting, as opposed to waiting to the winter meeting, given our ability to conduct business virtually and that the December New England Council meeting is relatively early in the month? I'm just wondering if there might be any benefit to conducting this board meeting virtually to make a decision sooner versus later.
Thanks, Adam. I'll turn to staff to see if that's helpful or what we have is okay.
That's up to the board. If the states need additional time to implement trip limits, then we could do that. But if meeting in January meets your state timelines, then I'm not sure it's necessary unless there's another rationale for having it early.
Okay. Is there any hands up on that? If not, we are actually getting past our time. If there's no other hands, I think we'll maybe give 2 minutes to caucus on the motion to postpone, and then see where that leads us. So no other hands, Tony. Then I guess we'll set the timer for 2 minutes.
I have one hand, Shanna Madsen.
Okay, Shanna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no dog in this fight, but I just wanted to point out that the main motion doesn't get to what Nicola is asking for either. To say that you're setting at least a 7,500 pound trip limit means that, again, if the Northeast Council comes back with 9,000 pounds, then I guess I'm confused as to how the main motion gets to what Nicola is now recommending as well. Just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I guess we'll see if we get to that point. We'll discuss that further if need be. But yeah, just knowing that we're kind of in overtime right now. Let's go ahead and just take 2 minutes to caucus, and we'll come back and vote on the motion to postpone action. Okay, 2 minutes is up. Does anyone need any additional time? If so, please raise your hand. Otherwise, go ahead and call the question.
I don't have any hands for time.
Okay, so it's a motion to postpone action around the state waters trip limits for FY 2022 until the ASMOC winter meeting. Motion by Ms. Ware, second by Mr. Borden. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
Okay, I think the hands have settled. I have Maine, Connecticut, NOAA Fisheries, New York, Virginia, Maryland, New Hampshire, and Virginia.
I think you said Virginia twice.
I did because 2 Virginia folks had their hands up. Sorry about that.
We're sorry about that, Tony.
It's okay. All right. I will put the hands down.
Okay, thanks. Was that 7 in favor?
That's what I had, Kirby.
Yes. Yep. So that's what I was just trying to double check. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. All those opposed, please raise your hand.
I have Mass, North Carolina, and New Jersey.
Okay, that's 3 opposed. Any null votes?
I have 1 null vote, Rhode Island.
Okay, and any abstentions?
I have 1 abstention, Delaware.
Okay, I think then the motion passes 7-3 to 1-1, if I'm correct on the vote count.
Yep, that's what we had.
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, we'll then address this again in the winter after we know what the New England Council decides on trip limits. So I think that covers that agenda item. Next up is to consider the fishery management plan review and state compliance for the 2020 fishing year. Kirby is up for that. Kirby, do we have, I guess for staff, do we have time to do that, or would it be better to handle that via an email vote later? I'll leave that up to staff to determine since we're running late.
I think we have a little flexibility in terms of both the next meeting and getting through this. I can quickly go through the presentation and then just need a motion for consideration.
All right, great, thanks. Yeah, so yeah, please proceed.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So next slide. I'll just give a brief overview, stock status, commercial landings and quota, state compliance, de minimis requests, and PRT recommendations. Next slide. So this was already covered by Jason, but we don't have any update on the stock status from what was presented back in 2018. As noted, we have a research track assessment scheduled for 2022, so that should be completed next year. Next slide. Just a reminder on what the commercial season is. As we were just discussing, May 1 to April 30th, the quota for fishing year 2020 was 23.19 million pounds. The triple limit for the northern region was 6,000 pounds. And the commercial landings were approximately 12.75 million pounds, which was a 30% decrease from fishing year 2019. Recreational harvest and discards, the rec harvest was about 236,000 pounds, which is an increase, but keep in mind that rec harvest estimate tends to be very low, and so this increased percentage is maybe a little misleading. The discards also decreased from 2019 to 1.7 million pounds. Next slide. In terms of state compliance, PRT reviewed all state compliance reports. All regions and states harvested within their quota, and the states implemented regulations consistent with the FMP. New York and Delaware have requested de minimis status and qualify based on the PRT's review. Next slide. Just in terms of PRT recommendations, we're requesting that the states be more clear in indicating where their landings are reported to, know where safest. The other note was that exempted fishing permits, currently the language in the FMP centers around biomedical research. There have not been really any exempted fishing permits issued in recent years for biomedical research. So when there's a future management document, if the board wants to consider revisiting what the exempted fishing permits are for, that might be most helpful And then last, the PRT just noted that the minimis right now for this FMP is not necessarily providing those de minimis states with a tremendous amount of benefit because they still have to report their landings out annually, and there is, at least weekly reporting that is being done by those states to NOAA fisheries. So those are the main points from the PRT. For the board's consideration today is to accept the FMP review and state compliance reports. Next slide. For Spiny Dogfish fishing year 2020 through 2021 and de minimis requests from New York and Delaware. I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Kirby. Any questions for Kirby?
I have no hands.
All right, thanks. Quick question, Kirby. Regarding the biological or biomedical permits, and then states you're reporting dogfish collected through scientific permits, which is totally different. Would it, aside from any future board action to expand what's required, for reporting, would it be better for those states just not to report those in the compliance reports if those permits are not specific to the biomedical industry?
No, we definitely still want it noted if there's exempted fishing permits being issued for, for example, educational purposes or other research. That's helpful because this is in addition many times to what the state is already harvesting under the commercial quota. So we want that information. That's just really noting that this facet of the FMP isn't really operating the way it had been in the past. So just flagging it for the board's consideration.
All right, yeah, great. I appreciate that. So if there's no further questions, I'll look for a motion to approve the FMP review, state compliance reports, and de minimis request.
I have Shanna.
Okay, Shanna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move to accept the FMP review and state compliance reports for the Spiny Dogfish 2020 and 2021 fishing year and de minimis requests from New York and Delaware.
Okay, thanks, Shanna. Second.
Nicola Meserve.
Okay, seconded by Nicola. Any discussion on the motion?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm talking to myself. No hands.
Okay, is there any objection to the motion?
I see no hands.
Okay, then we'll consider this approved by consent. Thank you. Next up is an update on the research track assessment, and Connor McManus will be giving us an update on that. So Connor, if you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. And so I'll be really quick here. I'm just going to give a quick update as to where we are with the Spiny Dogfish research track assessment. Next slide, please, Kirby. Great. So just as a background, we initiated the group in this past summer for Spiny Dogfish. Just for a bit of background, the research track assessments and this relatively new framework for assessments is designed to evaluate new data sets that can be either used to inform or the models or be used in the stock assessment models, of which then would be ultimately used in future management track assessments. Our goal here is to improve the stock assessment for Spiny Dogfish, again, evaluating new analytical techniques and such for the species, again, with this then new model being available as needed in future management track assessments. The work group has been officially formed now with members of the various entities listed here, and we started this past summer, and we are planned to go for peer review with the assessment in July of 2022. Next slide, please. So thus far, the working group has met 3 times, mainly working through some of the initial data availability questions, reviewing the previous assessment, as well as the various recommendations in the past for research elements by both the council and the SSC. So with the research track assessment itself, there are several new advancements that we're looking to take with it. With just some of them described here below. I think perhaps from the analytical side, the biggest advancements would be trying to move from a more index-based approach that relies heavily on one survey index, which Kirby or Jason spoke to earlier, being the spring science intertrol, and moving towards a more sophisticated framework or model that incorporates the life history of the species, as well as perhaps other surveys and information. The platform we're looking to use here is stock synthesis. And another major element that we're looking to update here is growth for the species. We have an effort to look at some of the spines, 4 spinies from some of the federal trawl surveys in the recent years, not just for comparison to growth from older growth models, which are believed to be by many outdated. So get an update on the growth rates for the species for use in the model, but then also just to understand how growth may be changing with the environment over multiple decades. There's also been a lot of discussion over the distribution of spiny dogfish, both on and off the shelf, as well as the differences in movement seasonally, over time, and by sex. So we'll look at that from two different ways. One is looking at tagging data that's been collected by the Science Center through some of their cooperative research efforts, and to get a sense of changes in migration and distribution. Also gives us a little bit of sense too as perhaps some of the stock structure for the species. And then also looking at more, again, spatial distribution, abundance and distribution for both males and females, to get us an understanding of environmental drivers and when we may or may not see them in certain regions, such as state waters. One thing I wanted to address for the board today is that we will also plan to engage stakeholders directly. So we have working group meetings that folks are allowed to attend, not just the working group members, but we also will have directed meetings with stakeholders to let them know on the process of the assessment, updates that we're making, provide clarity or background on some of the data that we're using in the assessment, and then also solicit feedback on some research elements that we'd like to that they would like to see addressed in the assessment as possible, as well as feedback on some different elements on the science that we would like to get some level of feedback on or perspective on as we see it from the data. So stay tuned for that. I will be certainly reaching out to members of the AP for those notifications, but also the board as interested. And I think that's all I had for you, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Connor. Yeah, interesting advances in this assessment compared to what's been done in the past. So I look forward to hearing more about the progress and eventually seeing the results. Any questions for Connor?
One hand from David Borden.
Hey, David?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Connor, there was a suggestion about trying to involve Canadian scientists in the discussion in another portion of the document. Will the Canadians be involved in this? I mean, it is a transboundary stock, and it might make some sense to at least get one Canadian scientist involved in this. Thank you.
Connor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for your question, David. So there is no Canadian scientists on the working group, but we are working with Canadian scientists in a couple of different facets. One is mainly trying to get survey information from those waters to understand changes over time and understanding how those compare to what we see in U.S. waters, particularly in the fall, where we see some of the spiny dogfish from the surveys perhaps aggregated more in the Gulf of Maine and Scotian Shelf, and as well as looking at other data streams that may help inform some of the analyses on density dependence and Again, understanding overall trends in the stock. So while there's no membership on the working group from the Canadians, we are in correspondence with them. I will also note that we've also, in terms of the new model development, we're also in conversations with the Northwest Fishery Science Center, or Northwest Fishery Science Center on the model as it relates to Pacific spiny dogfish, which they've used this template in the past. So we're hopeful that we can help improve the assessment here using a similar framework.
Thanks, Connor. Any further questions for Connor?
No hands.
All right, great. Thanks for the update, Connor, and look forward to hearing more about the assessment. So that takes us to other business. Is there any other business to bring forward before we adjourn?
No hands.
Okay. Anyways, thanks for everyone's patience on getting through this information. We'll discuss this again in February, and I just want to say I appreciated the opportunity to chair this board for the last 2 years, and special thanks to Kirby for helping me prepare for the meetings and keep me on track during the meetings. Nicola Meserve will serve as chair for the next 2 years, and I look forward to her leadership. So with that, we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.